Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I am Auron MacIntyre, and before we get started today, I just want to talk to you a little bit about election night. Obviously, every year we hear this is the most important election of your lifetime. You have to care, you have to be involved. It's existential crisis. And I definitely don't want to be that guy, but at this point, you do have to recognize that the things that the Democrats are saying, that they're doing, the open borders, everything else when it comes to the sovereignty of the United States, obviously you should get out there and support Donald Trump. But also on election night, you're going to want to know what's happening. And we've already heard from many different media outlets that you can't know what's happening, that they're going to be counting votes for the next, several weeks or whatever. You're going to want to know what's happening. Are there shenanigans going on? Are polling places being properly watched? Are votes being reported? Who's going to be the next president of the United States? So you're going to want to join us over at The Blaze for the election coverage of the 2024 presidential election. We'll be running the election night coverage with all of your favorite Blaze hosts. I'll be there live from the studio as well on one of the panels. So if you want to follow all of the things that are happening and get the best election breakdown, including yours truly, then you need to head over to blazeelection.com/Auron. That's blazeelection.com/Auron, and you can get $40 off your subscription to Blaze so that you can be joining us for that election night coverage. All right, guys. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens if Donald Trump wins. So we know that the polls seem to be showing a lead for Trump. Now, the polls could be all over the place. We've had many different incorrect polling results the last few Trump elections, though they tend to be against Trump and not in his favor. But either way, we know the methodology of the polls right now has not necessarily been great. However, you can feel the momentum. You can feel the momentum. Trump is doing these kind of great programs, reaching out. Obviously, he had the McDonald's thing that was very relatable. Kamala Harris is just an absolute disaster. You can see the desperation. They're putting her on anything and everything. Before she was just failing, hiding in the bunker like they tried to do with Joe Biden, and now they're trying to, put her out there in the hopes that that will solve her sagging poll numbers. She's even seeming to lose ground with some of the demographics that are generally very hardcore Democratic voters, like black men. Now, ultimately, I don't know. I'm always promised that that will shift, that this will be the year that that kind of demographic monolith breaks. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but the one thing I do know is we can all kind of feel that ultimately things are heading in Trump's direction. And so we could do yet another analysis of the polls and, the states and that kind of thing. But I wanted to go over a recent essay from Curtis Yarvin. We haven't looked at his writings in a while. And Yarvin wrote about why it might be difficult for Trump and Elon, and he's really treating this as kind of a package deal, that you're getting Elon as almost as another vice president for Donald Trump. He wrote an essay writing about why it might be difficult for them to enact the type of reforms that they want to. I think some of it makes some good points, but some of it is also off a little bit, and so I wanted to go through this essay and break down this analysis. But before we do all that, guys, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Hey guys, if you're looking to break into the world of fully remote jobs, I want you to listen closely. There's a new job stacking program focused solely on how to land remote jobs, even if you don't have any remote work experience. The new Remote Work Mastery program is designed to get you to successfully implement the strategies that allow you to leverage your current skill set, whatever that happens to be, into a fully remote role. No need to learn any new complicated skills like coding or finance. This is all centered around what you already have experience with. There are a lot more remote job opportunities in today's marketplace that go beyond the typical IT job set. The job stacking team will walk you through the entire process of identifying suitable remote positions that adjust to your experience, optimizing your resume, and acing your job interview so that you're set up for success in the world of remote work. So if landing a remote job is something that you're interested in, go to jobstacking.com/masterremote and schedule a call with Rolf today. All right, guys, so let's just jump into the essay here. I've gone a little bit ahead because Curtis Yarvin tends to do a lot of framing when it comes to these essays. He kind of rambles on about the etymology of Doge, in Italy and these kind of things. So I'm trying to jump in a little bit more to the meat of the essay here. but I will begin. He says, what's neat about the idea that if the Republicans win, Trump will appoint Elon to fix the government is like my vision of Elon taking Constantinople, perhaps with some kind of airship-borne FPV robot army. It exists entirely in a fantasy world. So obviously we know that Donald Trump has talked a lot about bringing Elon Musk in, right? He's obviously a huge Trump supporter. He's made big commitments to Trump. He's appeared at rallies, big financial donations. He has worked to get people to sign these pledges and vote for Trump and all this stuff. And Trump has said that he wants to work Elon into this, into this administration, especially in an office of, department. I'm trying to remember the entire acronym at this point, but it's the Doge, as Elon created. It's like the Department of Government Waste. It's cutting the government waste. Elon is famous, of course, for having cut a large amount of the Twitter staff and still having a product that continued to work properly. In fact, in many ways better than it did previously. And so, looking to do the same thing here. The man who can initiate like SpaceX and have it compete against NASA. The guy who can bring, Twitter kind of under control and cut its costs and its staff and still have a good product. He's looking to do the same thing here. In fact, my buddy over at the King Pilled podcast has even pointed out this idea of the PayPal mafia. You can go back and take a look, Matt, if you want to, my talk with him about the PayPal mafia, and the idea that several of the CEOs in Silicon Valley, including guys like Elon Musk, are interested in kind of installing Trump this time as kind of an avatar for their ability to run a functional country. They see how terrible the Democrats are, and they want to install somebody who won't make too many waves for them and ultimately allow them to do what they want. You can judge yourself after that conversation if you feel like that's kind of the correct the correct analysis. But it is very interesting in light of kind of what Yarvin is saying here. Yarvin seems to kind of acknowledge in many ways this arrangement that Trump will just kind of be a figurehead for the reforms that Elon and some of these other Silicon Valley tech bros want to kind of put into place here. Mark Andreessen and David Sachs and some of these other guys that are very famously supporting Trump at this point. And so I thought this essay was very interesting along those lines, because he takes a look and explores the possibility that this is what ultimately the arrangement will be and what that would look like, and if it's possible for Elon and kind of the other tech bros to step in and change something. He makes a reference back to something he said earlier here. This is the course of the fantasy world of the 95ers, which has more in common, I feel, with the fantasy world of the 68ers than it thinks it does. This fantasy world is the world that most Americans vote in. They seem to relatively okay with it. Even despite the experience of the last Trump administration, we all seem convinced on both sides that electing Trump in 2024 means electing some kind of American Mussolini. Now, obviously, the left will just say this outright. Oh, Trump is Hitler, Trump is Mussolini, Trump is Stalin, all rolled into one. Actually, there's an Atlantic article titled that. But his point here is not that Trump is Mussolini, but that ultimately both sides are acting as if Trump is going to have this massive amount of power, right? Kamala Harris just did a press conference before we went live talking about how Donald Trump is going to turn the military towards his will and use it to punish his enemies. And he's going to be this incredible dictator who's going to deploy the entire might of the United States against this. And, the left is obviously thinks of it this way, but the right is also acting as if as soon as Trump is elected, he can just flip a switch and kind of put all of these policies into place. He can make all these reforms. He has this incredible power that he can just wield because he was elected to the presidency of the United States in the same fashion as a dictator like Mussolini would. So the right doesn't see Trump as like the ascendant Mussolini. The left definitely does. But the right does treat him as if he has those kind of powers, that kind of influence, that ability to go ahead and put it immediately into play. And a lot of this article is going to be Trump kind of pointing out the fallacy of this understanding. Republicans and Democrats increasingly agree that they're voting on fascism for or against. Well, I kind of love it in a way. It is the most ridiculous and ahistorical thing in the world. It is a complete total fantasy. Nothing of the sort is happening or could possibly happen, for better or for worse. But in this ridiculous fantasy world, it makes perfect sense to elect Donald Trump and go have him put Elon Musk in charge of the US government. Sure, I love it. Let's do it. The question is not whether or not it will work. The question is, when it doesn't work, what will happen? Or maybe when it doesn't work, then what will Elon do? Perhaps this is the point where options like Constantinople start to open up. Let's look at what he would learn. Of course, it's kind of puzzling because you'd think he knew these things already, especially with respect to the state Oregon that does kind of basically the same thing as him, NASA. So basically he's saying, look, everyone is acting as if the minute Trump gets elected, he's going to have this incredible top-down power to reorganize the government simply because he won an election. And he'll put Elon Musk in place. And Elon Musk, because he's so competent and has the ability to operate these organizations, that he will just kind of step into that role and he will reform all this stuff. Now, it's funny because this is more or less what Yarvin has been advocating for a long time. He wanted an elected CEO. He wanted a CEO king, someone who had this level of power and could make these kind of changes. And ultimately, it's by proxy. You put Trump into place and then you get Elon Musk, right? So you don't directly elect Musk because you can't elect Musk. He wasn't born in the United States. He doesn't qualify under the Constitution, but you will basically be getting him put into the place as a CEO dictator in charge of reforming all of these issues, which, by the way, is what the original type of dictator actually was supposed to do. The dictator in Rome was assigned for a certain set of months, usually 6 months, to solve a particular problem, often warfare, but sometimes something else. And if you want to read Carl Schmitt's exploration of the concept of a dictator, he goes on to outline how kind of commissarial dictatorships are actually rather normal throughout much of Western history. And it was very common for, like, say, a king to place a momentary dictator in place over a specific issue and have them resolve that issue inside the king's government. And so in that way, you could kind of see it that way, right? You have Trump. He's kind of the leader. He's the elected leader. He's the formal leader of the United States in the sense of the process. But then you have Musk come in, and he's specifically assigned a dictatorial power over, this idea of government reform. And that will kind of solve it. That in many ways lines up with Yarvin's own idea of the way that the United States government will be run. But Yarvin's fear really in this essay, I think, is that Musk and Trump don't recognize the necessity of that kind of power, and that they will attempt to run this as if a normal election has taken place and a normal shift in power has taken place. And when they apply that stuff, then they're going to find that it doesn't work. And his question, as he points out here, is, what does that mean for Elon, right? Like, if Elon recognizes that he needs a vehicle like Trump to get him into power so that he can then correct the government, so that he can then go on and do the things he actually wants to do as a CEO, and then that fails, right? He goes through the normal government processes, treats it as a normal government agency or office, and that fails. Then what does Elon do, right? That's where things get interesting. But let's go back to the essay here, because he's going to make some points using NASA and SpaceX. Surely, if Elon can fix Washington, he'd start by fixing NASA. Suppose he wanted to turn NASA into SpaceX. Many aspects of the governance of America are every bit as important as SpaceX, yet have no SpaceX, only a NASA, only a DMV. Moreover, if the IQ of the federal employees were calculated agency by agency, surely NASA would be well near the top. It's always easier to work with smart people, especially for Elon, who doesn't have much experience managing the DMV ladies. So he's saying, basically, let's just turn this into a microcosm, right? We could talk about why it might be difficult to reform the entire government, but let's just look at something Elon already does, and already does well, and boil the whole experiment down to this. How, if Elon is already successfully in charge of SpaceX, how would he just properly reform NASA? Right? Why, if he already knows how to run a successful space agency, which is already launching rockets better than NASA, surely he could just reform NASA. And the people at NASA are smarter. They're not like the kind of the dregs that have been brought in by the Democratic Party to operate your average government bureaucracy. So if he can fix this bureaucracy with smart people, then perhaps that will give him a plan for fixing kind of a larger set of the government apparatus. Why not have Elon wet his teeth on the relatively easy problem of NASA? Maybe by having Trump appoint him as the NASA administrator. Once he has made NASA work as well as SpaceX, he'll start to take on the rest of DC. Sure, I think this would be an excellent way to start. So yeah, you just put Elon in charge of this one agency to give you an idea of what it would look like to actually reform a government agency. And once he's conquered this bureaucracy, you can widen the process out. Of course, what he would find is that the NASA administrator does not actually have the power to fix NASA. He doesn't have 1/1000th of the power to fix NASA. He's not at all in charge of NASA the way that a CEO would be in charge of NASA. That is given $25 billion a year and told to explore space without it. So he's saying, or with it. So he's saying the first important thing to recognize is that you could put Elon in the role of the NASA administrator and give him the powers of the NASA administrator, but that would not actually give him the tools he needs to fix NASA, because NASA is specifically structured in a way that is fundamentally different from a CEO. And so if he attempted to use the same powers, he would find that he didn't have them. If he tried to exercise the same level of control, he would find that it didn't actually work. Back to the essay here. He is a purely reactive, even decorative fixture who is sometimes given decisions to make. As a decision maker, in fact, he is more of a judge than an executive. Yes, some of these judgments are real and do matter. If Elon made all these decisions correctly for 1,000 years, however, he would not even come close to fixing NASA. Reactive management is not management. It's not even power. So what he's saying here is that the organization does not work in the way that we understand it. And this, I think, is an important point. I will disagree with Yarvin here later on, but I think this is an important point. A lot of the time, we look at power and we say there is one way power works. And we think of a king or a dictator, as he was pointing out earlier, and we say, this is how power works all the time. That one guy tells other people what to do. That is the form that power takes. And so any reform would happen under this type of setup. But Yarvin is saying you need to understand that the structure of the organization is critical. And if the structure of the organization is not monarchical or is not top down in the CEO style, then the form of power cannot be that, right? A lot of people will say, well, why do they keep putting guys like Joe Biden or Kamala Harris in power? Why don't they just put someone competent who could kind of rule the United States like a Democrat, like a dictator on the left, right? And the answer is they can't do that because the structure they've created is an oligarchy, right? It is a theocratic oligarchy. And that form of power prevents the application of monarchical rule. Even if you had someone capable of it, you couldn't actually implement it because of the way the entire system is structured. And so what you need is not just the replacement of one figure inside an oligarchical structure. No one person is critical to an oligarchic structure because no one wields that type of power. And so you can't imagine a scenario in which power flows the same way it would in a dictatorship or a monarchy when you have an oligarchy. And he's basically saying the same thing here, right? Like Elon Musk could not act as a CEO, even if he was placed as a CEO in the role of the head of NASA, because NASA is fundamentally not designed to function the way that a corporation actually functions. If he attempted to use those powers, if he attempted to use those strategies, the form of the organization would deny him that type of power, even though he is that kind of leader and has that level of ability, right? That's what he's trying to, the nuance there that he's trying to highlight. Back to our essay here. As an executive with the authority of a CEO, Elon Musk would look at NASA and see the simple truth about it. There's obviously no way to fix it. Or rather, there is one way to fix it. Liquidate it and hire some of the employees in a new organization, maybe even SpaceX. Of course, this would be literally illegal. But so would anything Musk or any other NASA administrator would need to do to fix NASA. NASA is not managed. So this is critical. And I think this is important. This is a legitimate part of Yarvin's essay. You cannot use the powers of the CEO or dictator or whatever to actually change NASA because the bureaucratic nature of the organization, the form of power, prevents it. So the only thing to do is to scrap it and start again. But trying to scrap it and start again would literally be illegal. It would violate the law. Because of the way that we have structured our government and because of the way we have structured our power, yes, in the original Constitution, the president did have this type of power. But we have rearranged the Constitution over time to basically stop this type of power from being utilized. So even though that type of power would be constitutional in its original meaning, there would be nothing illegal or immoral or out of character with the American form of government to have a vigorous executive exercise control over the executive branch. While that's true historically, practically today, the way that the law is written and the way that the government is actually structured, not just the way it's structured in the Constitution somewhere, but the way it really works, this is functionally illegal. And that's why, and I've said this several times, if Donald Trump acts like a real president, like just acts as a president in the Constitution, not violating any of the parts of Article 2, even if he did, he would be seen as a dictator. He would be seen as a criminal. He would be accused of breaking the law because he would functionally have to break the way that the United States government works now, as we understand it, in order to make it work the way it was supposed to. And so even without violating any constitutional principles, Donald Trump would effectively be breaking the law and looking like a dictator just by acting as a real president. And Yarvin is basically making the same point here about Elon trying to reform things, right? By actually acting as a CEO and a real person in charge of the organization, he would be functionally breaking the law as we understand it now, and he seems unwilling to do that as of now. Now, the interesting thing, as he pointed out early in the essay, is maybe Elon will gain that courage, right? Maybe Elon will see this failure and eventually gain that courage. But if he's following the rules as we understand them right now, he would not be able to properly do what is necessary to reform an organization like NASA. No one is in charge of NASA. No, NASA is operated according to law. And if Elon Musk insists on breaking the law, we can treat him like any other criminal immigrant. Let's see if South Africa can catch a rocket with toothpicks. That's pretty funny. The real power over NASA is, of course, the Hill, which micromanages its spending on everything. The relationship between the Hill staff, the lobbyists who surround them, and the agency itself is the real structure of power. And again, this is the heart of the Yarvin essay. You can call this one a doomer. I get it. Again, I'm going to disagree with him on here, but I do think he is right to encourage people to understand the real form of power in these organizations. Even if you do think that Elon can change this, and I do, spoiler alert, I do think that he is wrong and Elon can change this. But in order to do it, he must recognize many of the things that Yarvin is saying in this essay. And so I think it's worth going through because while I think some of the conclusions are wrong, I think that the argument being made about the form that must be understood and the way that power must be approached is really critical, because if you go in there thinking we can just use the process as it exists now, then you'll end up failing. If we zoom out a little bit, we'll see the real power over Washington is Congress. The fantasy world containing Elon and the voters, one hallmark of the 95ers is their belief totally unfounded, so far as I can see, in the principle of Vox Populi, Vox Dei, which is the voice of the people is the voice of God. Sadly, Elon, the hoi polloi, and the elites can both be out to lunch, is a fantasy primarily in one way. So he's trying to explain that Elon, Trump, the Republican voting base, they still seem to kind of have this understanding that they are in charge, that by electing Trump, they will be in charge of things. But Yarvin is trying to lay out, actually, no, the connection between the actual voting of the people, the actual will of the people, and the things done in the name of people are vastly different. And without understanding that, you'll fall back into a trap that many people, many Republicans, many people on the right have fell into very often. It indulges the false belief that the U.S. government has an executive branch, that we elect a president and we are electing the chief executive of the executive branch. Nothing could be further from the truth. We have an administrative branch for whose policy, budget, and personnel Congress is responsible, not the president. And when we elect a president, we are electing a ceremonial figurehead, but who has some residual powers, sure. But look at the rule, not the exception. Over time, the exception will go away. You don't really think Joe Biden is in charge or Kamala Harris could be? Come on. No one is in charge. Not in that sense. While we are supposed to have a president who's like a CEO, we actually don't. And so here he's making the same point I made a little earlier, which is that, yes, according to the Article 2 of the Constitution, a real president looks like a CEO. He looks like a chief executive. He looks like someone who has complete dominion over the executive branch. And so if you believe the Constitution operates as intended right now, up to this day, if you actually believe the Constitution governs the United States, then you believe in the system of reforms that Elon could impose, that Trump could impose. But that's not what's happening. The Constitution is not ruling the United States. We don't have an executive branch. We have an administrative branch. And that administrative branch is specifically designed to resist the impulses of any given person elected to the office. They're supposed to be fair ceremonial figureheads. We can see this from Joe Biden. You know, as he points out, Kamala Harris is way too dumb to actually operate the United States government. And Donald Trump was elected with the understanding that he would be president, but we quickly learned that actually, while Trump was capable of making some changes, ultimately he was defeated by the swamp, by the machine in Washington, because actually, while he was trying to use the powers in Article 2, like he's constitutionally elected, the real power does something entirely different. That's not listed in the Constitution. And so if you act as if these things are real without understanding the underlying mechanisms of power, then you will make a mistake. Now, the thing that I want to make clear here, the thing that I disagree with is you ultimately do need to elect someone as if they can do this. And he'll kind of allude to this here later on. But you actually do need someone like Trump who does believe he has that power, but also has the clear-eyed ability to see how power works now and being willing to tear down anything between the way that power works now and the way it's supposed to work. The power he should have as a legitimately elected president of the United States. But again, doing that will make Trump look like a dictator. That's all there is to it. The way even the right understands the government now is that Trump should be entirely ensconced in kind of these restrictions that the bureaucracy brings to the table. Most Republican politicians totally believe that. Some people, on the base don't, but the people in the government do. And so he would have to go up not against just the left, as we saw in his first administration, but the right as well, in an attempt to actually do the job he was elected to do. And you have to go in clear-eyed with the confidence to say, actually, these are my elected powers, and I am going to exercise them. But also understanding what would stand between you and the exercise of that power, right? Like, okay, I believe I was elected to this office. The people who voted for me believe I was elected to this office. I know that under Article 2, I have these powers. But I also know that the entire system is not governed by the rightful document governing the United States. And therefore, I have to be ready to tear down any barrier between the lawful powers that should be given to the President of the United States and the way the system actually works in the current day. Back to our article here. What we call an executive branch has become a creature of the legislative branch, and this is as unconstitutional as it gets. So, like you said, this is an unconstitutional development. The fact that this is how power works now is realpolitik. But to be clear, if you're someone who stands on constitutional principle and says, I just want to return to the Constitution, we can have a longer discussion on why that might be difficult. But at the very least, we can agree that even a basic return to the Constitution would require what it would be seen as basically extra legal action. It means the Constitution is literally describing a different form of government. So the Constitution isn't what we have now. It was what we had once. Maybe it's what we could have again, but it is not what we have now. The Constitution and Article 2 do not accurately describe the way that the branches of government, especially the executive branch, work today. Moreover, if you believe in democracy, you notice that Congress is ballasted against the waves of public opinion by two very powerful support structures. The first is the incumbency rate, 95% in the House and 90% in the Senate. The second is the seniority system in committee assignments. This is a point I made in my book, The Total State. We call America a democracy. We say that popular sovereignty is supposed to rule the United States, But all you have to do is look at just the basic organs that are actually supposed to represent the popular will in the United States, and you recognize pretty quickly that actually the structure of those organs is to deny the public will, or shape, more importantly, the public will at every opportunity. This is why unpopular policies such as mass immigration can continue despite persistent majority public opposition. The public's opinion does not matter, even if the powers that be can't change the public's mind. Though usually they can change the public's mind, and this change, or this is called change, and it is the most sacred kind of democracy. So like I've said a couple times, this is my original red pill moment, right? Like the thing that really red pilled me on why the government just doesn't work the way that we were supposed to. Eventually COVID really pushed me over the edge. But the first thing that really triggered my, hey, what's up with this, is the immigration issue. When I started seeing the migrant crisis in Europe and the way that nobody wanted this, right? And it was highly unpopular, and yet the leaders kept pushing it onto people. I decided to take a look at the United States and say, hey, I feel like something similar might be happening here. And I look at the public polling for decades, and the public polling is very clear. It says that the American people do not want mass immigration at all. Like, not even the left. Like, even the left was against mass migration, not just illegal, but legal as well. Everyone was against illegal immigration. Like, even the left, or the majority, by the vast majority, was against legal immigration. But also, legal immigration was unpopular with the majority of the left until just about 10 years ago. And despite this fact, both the left and the right, the Republicans and the Democrats, entirely ignored this and continued to push anyway. And so you can see that the incumbency rate in Congress and the Senate really shows you why the public opinion never really shifted this. But also, he makes the really important point that ultimately for the Democrats and the Republicans, democracy is about their ability to dictate public opinion. That's actually what they mean by democracy. So when the Democrats are talking about our sacred democracy and why elections might be a danger to our sacred democracy, what they're trying to say is that democracy is really our ability to manipulate what you believe, right? It's our ability to change what the public thinks. And anything that Donald Trump or anyone else would do that would hinder our ability to manipulate public opinion is a attack on democracy, because that's actually how we are controlled. We are controlled through the manipulation of public opinion. That's how the ruling class actually keeps its power, along with financial manipulation and other means. But primarily, it is that ability to use the media and academia to control public opinion. And so that is really what the ruling class is trying to defend. Even in Article 1, the Constitution is describing a different form of government, a parliament. A parliament is a democratically elected debating society. Congress is not in any way a parliamentary body. It is a bureaucratic body, a committee system. Most politicians elected to Congress are fundraisers, not statesmen, and leave all the actual legislative work to their staffs, who farm it out to lobbyists and activists. The result of this work is a system of monstrous omnibus bills that no one reads in toto, and which does not in any way resemble any historical sense of the word law. In short, the real government we have has nothing at all to do with the Constitution. It is an entirely different thing. And that is, I think, the main point that needs to be sunken in this essay, right? Even when it comes to Congress, even when it comes to the democratic representative form of government, or the branch of government that is supposed to represent at least that aspect of our government in our mixed constitution, Congress doesn't do what it's supposed to do, right? In theory, it would get together a bunch of people who represent the interests of different regions of the country, and they would debate the different policies that may or may not be put into place by the government, and then they would institute the things that they come to an agreement on as the best outcomes for the United States, in its entirety. But that is absolutely not what happens. As Yarvin points out, there is zero debate in the Congress, right? GOP congressmen will get up and hold, to give speeches, and, senators will address the Senate and filibuster and hold, these different committee hearings and whatnot. And they'll grandstand for the cameras and whatnot, but no one cares. No one's listening. No one is sitting there listening to Mike Lee's speeches, even if they're really good, or, Rand Paul's speeches or something like that, Thomas Massey. no one is listening to those and saying, oh, well, that man has changed my mind. And now, because I am a statesman, I'm a leader, I am more interested in the good of my people and the well-being of the country as a whole than I am, in particular, foreign interests or influences or powers or ideological agendas. I'm going to change my mind to vote and encourage others to vote because this argument was just so compelling. No, like the marketplace of ideas has nothing to do with Congress. Congress is a bureaucratic body that has at its core just a working committee system. And this is how laws actually get passed, right? They have very little to do with the back and forth of guys who, let's be honest, make all, they're good at raising money and maybe doing Fox News hits, right? Like they are not people who are actually good at grasping the intricacies of policy, debating those, and then putting them into practice. That's just not the way that the government actually works, which means the two branches of government we've already discussed, which are the legislative and the executive, neither of them actually operate in any way that the Constitution says they do. So we are not dealing with the Constitution. We're not dealing with constitutional powers. We are dealing with a very different system with a very different set of rules. And if you try to step in, like many people do, like, Republican politicians and even Donald Trump did as they step into their offices, if you step in and say, I'm going to change the world by using these duly elected powers of my office, you do not understand what is happening. You do not understand your role in all of this. Back to our essay here. If you believe in constitutions, which I kind of don't, that is the right thing to do when the Constitution, what is the right thing to do when the Constitution has been broken? When it's plain letter, which indeed states that the federal government has a CEO who is president, no longer operates. Most people would say the right thing to do is to correct the error and restore the Constitution. But when all existing institutions are so blatantly unconstitutional, the right thing in this sense means enforcing a fantasy on the real world. Again, this is something I address in my book, The Total State. Many people who just want to restore the Constitution want to do so by going through the exact same processes that the Constitution lays out. But if the system the Constitution lays out is already broken and you can't use it to run the country, then you probably can't use it to restore the rules the country is supposed to run under. Machiavelli addresses this, actually. He talks about how all city-states or civilizations are founded on basically these immoral acts that then create a situation in which a moral society can be built. So you have to do things outside the law, things that would be unsavory to kind of the average person, the rules of the game as we understand them, to create a society in which we can actually have rules of the game, to have a society in which we can actually be ruled by the law, by the Constitution, by principles, by these things. You have to set that up first, do whatever it takes to set that up, and then once it's in place, you can go about it. And he says specifically in this passage, Machiavelli, that if at any point, and this often happens in the life cycles of a civilization, that civilization starts falling off the rules that have already been established, that the system that was governing it kind of falls away like it has in the United States, then basically you have to return to that moment of someone being willing to do what it takes to restore that, even if those things are outside of the law, outside of the actual way that the government is supposed to work. And so in a very real sense, Yarvin is addressing the same problem here and saying, look, if the Constitution has fallen off and you can't actually govern under it anymore, then maybe you could put it back into place. But even if you are a Constitution respecter who wants to put it into place and go back, you must be willing to go and work outside the systems of the Constitution to reinstate the systems of the Constitution. Because as they are now, the systems of the Constitution are gone. They don't work. You can't follow those rules and get the result that you're looking for. And again, this is something very frustrating to conservatives because they're like, no, I just want to follow the rules the Constitution set out. There are rules. They're written down. That's the way the government works. We follow them. Boom. We're right back to America being the best. But Yarvin is saying no, actually. And if you follow that, if you operate in that fantasy world, then you will not only fail, you'll put yourself in extreme danger. If this Constitution is not operating at all, if it has zero relationship to reality, why should we try to operate it? What basis do we have for believing that it works well? Perhaps it doesn't work at all, which is why it wasn't being operated. And this is just the Spooner argument restated, right? If the Constitution could have prevented the growth of government, if the Constitution could have prevented the devolution of the moral character of our leaders, if the Constitution could have protected us against where we are now, it would have. And so if it didn't, whatever its merits, whatever the reasons it was put into into place originally, it's not the way in which we are operating now, and it can't be the way we're going to operate in the future, or at least until we have restored things to a state where you could have that Constitution be re-implemented. It gets worse. We actually do know that Washington can be operated executively because in the lives of those now living, it was. FDR was a real CEO and ran the executive branch like an executive organization. To really learn why this is not possible, learn from FDR. If Elon Musk with the Doge wants to explain in authentic Washington terms how to make Washington efficient, laugh out loud, he can look at the story of Harold Smith, who ran FDR's Bureau of the Budget, ancestors today's OMB. The old Bureau of the Budget put the equivalent of McKinsey Consulting in every nook and cranny of USG and had the power to just zero out anything Harold Smith thought was useless. That's why they called him the general manager of the US government. Of course, in those days, the president actually set the budget. Now there is no budget at all, really, just omnibus bills. The president's budget is a stunt and a press release, and there is no general manager of the U.S. government. Yeah, I remember at some point we actually passed budgets in the United States. It's been a very long time, and even then they were kind of fake. But we don't even do that anymore, right? Like it's just a bunch of continuing resolutions over and over again and omnibus budget bills. We never actually hash this out. The fantasy Washington that exists in the landscape of politics looks convincing for a simple reason. It used to be real. So he's not denying that at some point this was actually how the government worked. This really was the way the American government worked. It's not that the Constitution never worked, but it just hasn't worked this way in a long time. The president used to be in charge of the government. They used to be actual debates in Congress. Your vote used to mean something. And most important, entropy exists. There is no way to roll time backward. There is no way Donald Trump can just give Elon Musk the power of Harold Smith. You might say that Elon Musk's plan is realistic because it is something Washington has already done. But Washington in 1944 is not Washington in 2024, and there is no way to roll it back. Washington is in Washington 1944, Manhattan Project. Washington in 2024, the Department of Energy. So here I'm not so sure. I agree with Yarvin that you can't just roll it back, right? It won't be exactly like it was last time. You can't just say, oh, now we're going to do this thing and it's going to be exactly the same way as it was before. We're just going to take this power back. But I'm not so sure that you can't create a new version of this office. Again, this kind of commissarial dictatorship, people are going to take that out of context, but I'm using it in its technical term. You can put someone in charge of this aspect of the government and have them cut through the red tape, as long as they understand what they are actually doing, as long as they really understand what should be going on. If they go in saying, oh, well, I'll just use the powers of the government as I understand them now, I'll follow the rules. When someone tells me I'm breaking a rule, I'll back off and find another way forward. If you go in with that mindset, you're going to lose. It's not going to work, right? You have to go in the mindset of, this is what I was elected to do. This is what the Constitution actually says. And I don't care what the organization is designed to do. I don't care what the restrictions are. I don't care what laws stand between me and my constitutional powers. Those are my constitutional powers. And any law that is keeping me from exercising those constitutional powers is by definition unconstitutional. It is a violation of the Constitution. So therefore, I need to be ready to go in and stop pretending that the government works the way the Constitution says, and instead say, I'm here to restore the way the Constitution says. The tragedy of Trump is that he is not there to break. The tragedy of Trump is that he is not there to break this kayfabe. He is not there to tell you his job is not real. He is there to make it real, which, since it cannot be done without breaking the law, which he has no intention of doing, it will not happen. He will therefore choose the second best option, and that is to do his best to pretend it is real. And say what you want about Donald Trump, but no one has ever been better at acting as if. So he's saying, look, I don't think Donald Trump can do this. I don't think he has the ability to do this. Even if he goes in there and tries to implement this, ultimately, he's not willing to tell the truth about the state of the U.S. government. So he's going to keep the illusion going. He's not going to come to the American people and say, look, I know you elected me as president, but Washington is fake. The power of the presidency is fake. The government is controlled by these bureaucrats. They will not let me do anything. And so I need more power. I need a different type of power. I need a power that you have not given to a president before, because even the powers of the president as they should exist cannot fix this problem. But he's not going to do that. He's going to stay within the bounds of the system. He's going to continue the myth that the Constitution as it is now is the thing actually governing. And so therefore, all he's going to do is fake it. Because if he had to do the real thing, he would have to speak truth that he's not willing to speak. And he'd have to take steps he's not willing to take. Back to our essay here. Moreover, this analysis severely understates the dimensions of the problem. It's not just that it's impossible to fix NASA or any other agency, at least any agency less prosaic than, say, the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard could probably use a full reorganization. But the Department of Energy, state, it's not just that these agencies are inefficiently administered. They are. But for many, even their mission is unclear. What would the U.S. in 2024 actually be doing about its international relations? We have many assumptions about this question, which seem to have last been fully reconsidered in 1945, if not 1919. So he's saying, look, we've got this post-war consensus, and we've been operating on autopilot ever since. We live in the world that FDR made, and no one is willing to question the underlying structures of power that would be necessary to change any of this. And so even if we did have full control of these agencies, which he doesn't believe that we're going to get, then we wouldn't be able to change these things because we're not even willing to reconsider the fundamental conceptions that underlie something like the post-war consensus. Back to our essay here. What Elon will learn, I hope, is that the question of how to manage NASA and the question of how to govern the United States can only be answered from first principles. It is not even possible to restore the Constitution. There is no Constitution. It is a dead letter, and it has been our whole lives. And until we realize this, nothing at all can be done. So, pretty bold assertion, but I think pretty fair assertion, which is that we have never lived on a constitutional republic in our lifetime. There was a country called the United States at one point that was a constitutionally governed republic, but it has not been around for a long time. And it's not just going back to like when most conservatives are like, oh man, we stopped following the Constitution in 2010 or something. No, this goes way back for a very long time. I would say probably till the 1860s. And we have simply not had a constitutionally governed republic since that point. And we have to go back down. We have to strip it all down to the brass tacks and say, okay, how do we actually govern this system? If we can't govern it with a constitution, how do we govern it? And again, he doesn't address this here, but there's a larger conversation of whether we are even people who can be governed by the Constitution, because the founding fathers themselves recognized that the Constitution was for a specific type of people, a specific people with a way of being, a religious understanding, a community, a history, a shared tradition that we simply do not have at this moment. Now, we should probably move back towards that tradition, but until then, can we even be governed by the Constitution? Should we gain the power to restore it? These are all really important questions that I think we need to consider. Back to the end of this essay. Is it possible for us to realize this? Well, Elon clearly has not realized it so far, and most of us are not as smart as Elon. So maybe the answer is no. On the other hand, the world is changing. It's not there yet, but maybe the real Project 2025 is Project 2029. Let's not get too high on our own hopium, but so at the end here, this is my other problem with Elon, with Yarvin's assertion. He asserts that Elon doesn't understand the problem, but I'm not sure that's true. Yes, like Elon and Trump are using the current rhetoric, right? But I don't think Elon is stupid, as he points out here. And I think Elon does realize that perhaps many of these organizations are fundamentally flawed. and that they cannot be recovered, that they cannot be repaired. And so while you do have to go through the motions of saying, oh, well, okay, here's the president, we're appointing this guy in this department, and he's going to have these powers. I'm not sure that Elon doesn't recognize that part of those powers have to be dismantling these organizations. You have to get the FBI. You obviously should just gut something like NASA and replace it. Many of these organizations are openly hostile to the American people. They are willing to destroy conservatives, the GOP. This is the truth about many of the organizations in the American government. They have to be torn down and rebuilt from the ground up with people who are loyal and people who care about the United States and people who will actually govern and operate organizations in the interest of the American people. I'm not sure that Elon doesn't know that. Now, maybe this, we could go 4D chess, right? We were on our 3D chess. Maybe we can go to 4D chess. Maybe Yarvin does know that, right? Because Yarvin's not stupid either. Maybe Yarvin does know that, and he's saying this specifically hoping that it reaches Elon's ear, right? Hoping that Elon hears this and says, oh, I need to step up. I need to run things this way. I need to take action. Maybe this piece is for Elon in like the sense that the prince was, for a specific ruler. Maybe that's why he's writing this, is ultimately he wants Elon to take this understanding and he's trying to reinforce this. I don't know for sure. That's all speculation. My point is, as it's written here, I'm not sure he's correct about Elon and the way he would approach this. So that's kind of what I wanted to read through. Like I said, things feel like they're heading in Trump's direction. The momentum is behind him. We'll still have to see what happens. You can join us on election night. I'll be anchoring one of the deaths during the whole thing. But ultimately, I want to focus beyond the election because we can sit here and be like, the campaign commercials and whatever. There's plenty of people doing that. I don't think that's interesting content, for me to do the 9th time over. There are people who are much better at doing it, and God bless them, let them do it. But I wanted to look at this because I do think it's interesting to look at what would actually happen if Trump was in power. What would it take? He really does put Elon into this position. Elon and Trump really do come in with the fire to change things. How do they do that? What does it look like? What do they need to watch out for? What pitfalls do they need to avoid? What do they need to realize about the true nature of power in the United States government and how it can be influenced? I think those are all things that are at least pointed to in this essay. And so I think it's valuable in that way, even if I don't agree with all of its assertions. All right, guys, let's head over to the questions of the people here. King Pill, hey, there he is. He says, my nose started itching suddenly. Thanks for the shout out, my friend. Beating me to the punch on the Yarvin live reading. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this really does align very directly with the theory of kind of the Silicon Valley tech bro alliance trying to use Trump to break in. Again, maybe it's all speculation, but the fact that these developments have occurred and that Yarvin is giving advice directly to Elon as if Elon is actually being elected. Those are very interesting developments. They do speak to a particular possible political reality that King Pilled has laid out on this show and his own. Robert Weinsfeld said, do we want Trump to fix immigration, inflation, etc.? Yes. Do we think he will? Unsure. It's good enough to just drive our enemies to double their Xanax prescriptions, or do we need policy results? Right. So this is always the thing, right? Trump is going to drive people crazy no matter what. That's true. Will he, actually implement some of the things he promised last time, or hopefully even more because more has become necessary? We don't know. We just don't know. And you never know with any politician, right? That's just the case. So you can throw your support behind someone, but ultimately, will they deliver? Will they be the leader they promised to be? Always difficult to know. And it's not like Trump has the most amazing track record. But as you point out, he does drive people crazy. And in a way, and I've said this several times, the response the left will have to Trump's election is far more important than the election itself. If Trump is reelected, the way that the left tries to push and shape the American public, the way that they are probably willing to turn to violence, they are turning to these things, that changes things rather drastically. I'm not hoping for any of that, but I am predicting it. I do think it's very possible. And if that happens, a lot more things go on the table, right? All of a sudden, people are far more willing to say, just fix it, right? I just don't want the left to destroy my home. I don't want the left to throw me in prison. I don't want the left to destroy my family, my kids. I don't want my nation flooded with illegal immigrants. Just fix it. And when you get that kind of mandate, now we're talking about real power. And maybe that does actually fix things. So will Trump be the person who actually makes the change happen? Or will he be the catalyst that brings about the guy who does make things happen? I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows. But it does put us in a position where we are on that track, for better or for worse. And I think ultimately that will be the case. Tiny Stupid Demon says, if America is not a democracy, then why is my Colorado ballot so freaking long? Bonus points for using the term commissarial dictatorship. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. No, you get the ballot that is the size of a home mortgage or like a Best Buy receipt, right? Like this. Let's see here. Tiny Rick says, loved your stream with Dave. Almost finished with the Total State. Great work. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the book. Guys, if you haven't picked up the book, of course, you can still do that. It's over on Amazon. We're supposed to be getting the audiobook out soon. I've been promised this several times. Hopefully it actually happens this time. But yeah, talking to Dave is always great. We had to pre-record that one because of his schedule and my schedule, but I was glad people enjoyed that one. People responded to it very well. So thank you everybody for, if you're reading the book or enjoying the show, I really appreciate it. Wouldn't be able to do this without you. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for those that submitted questions. If it's your first time on this channel, of course, you can go ahead and subscribe. Make sure you click the bell, notifications, all that stuff, so you can actually catch the streams when they go live. If you would like to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you can do so by subscribing to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. By the way, podcast has grown significantly. The audience, whatever you're seeing on YouTube is like double or triple with the podcast and all the other outlets. So really appreciate that. So many people are audio listeners. Those numbers keep growing. So really appreciate people doing that. And of course, if you want to catch these shows on Rumble and Odyssey, I also upload over there. Everything is on Blaze TV. You can catch anything that ends up being censored or anything like that. All ends up over at Blaze TV as well. Thank you everybody for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.